I had always thought my mornings by the lake would be mine and mine alone. A quiet ritual of coffee in hand, the water reflecting the sky, the world reduced to nothing more than the gentle lapping of waves and the soft rustle of trees. It was my sanctuary, the culmination of 9 months of saving, planning, and dreaming. The place where every decision had been deliberate, every inch claimed by my name on the deed. And yet, as I stepped onto the dock that morning, my eyes fell on something entirely foreign. Bright yellow stickers plastered across the posts, official-looking and impossible to ignore. My heart sank. Who would dare mark my property like this? How could anyone possibly assume authority here? The letters on the sticker seemed to mock me. Property inspection complete. Community standards verified. Next review in 30 days. My stomach tightened as disbelief gave way to anger. This wasn't just a minor oversight or a neighborly mistake. This was a claim, an intrusion, a declaration that someone else thought they owned a piece of the world I had carved out for myself. I scanned the QR code out of sheer necessity, driven by curiosity that battled my growing frustration, and found my lake listed on the HOA website, boldly labeled as a community amenity. My fishing dock, the small kayak storage, even the quiet swimming cove, features I had painstakingly built or maintained, were now cataloged as part of someone else's territory. I felt a wave of disbelief crash over me. How could they? Why would they? My personal sanctuary, the place I had envisioned as untouched and private, was suddenly up for grabs in some bureaucratic registry, stripped of the protection I thought my deed guaranteed. And then she appeared, Melene Pierce, the HOA president. Clipboard in hand, her expression radiated certainty, as though she belonged here more than I did. She didn't just arrive. She announced her claim, a smile of smug authority framed by words I couldn't ignore. I was not in the HOA, she said, and therefore, by her reasoning, the lake was theirs to control. My blood ran cold, and my resolve ignited at the same time. This wasn't just a violation of property. It was a challenge to everything I had built, every sacrifice I had made. As I stood there gripping the sticker in my hand, I realized that this moment, this shock, was the beginning of a battle I couldn't ignore. A fight not just for a lake, but for the principle that the boundaries of one's life and labor cannot be overwritten by audacious entitlement. I stepped closer to the stickers, trying to make sense of the surreal situation. My fingers hesitated over the QR code, a small square that in its quiet way promised answers, or perhaps more questions. When I scanned it, the screen illuminated something I could hardly believe. My private lake, my dock, even the small kayak storage I had installed with care, all listed as an official HOA amenity. The words stared back at me, precise and bold, like a bureaucratic declaration. Premium access for residents. Coming soon, seasonal passes and community events. My mind raced. Was this real? How could a private property, purchased and documented with painstaking diligence, suddenly be treated as a shared public resource by an organization I had never joined? My stomach churned, a mix of disbelief and rising indignation. Before I could fully process it, she arrived. Melene Pierce, clipboard in hand, her posture rigid with confidence, approached as though she had a right to stand there on my dock, to assert authority over every inch of my property. She introduced herself with a tone that brooked no argument and immediately began explaining the so-called safety inspection, emphasizing procedures, checklists, and community standards. Her words felt rehearsed, almost mechanical, but there was an edge beneath them, a sense of entitlement that made my skin crawl. She spoke as if the lake, the dock, the very water itself belonged not to the person standing in front of her, but to the HOA, to the collective authority she represented. I wanted to ask, why do you think you can do this? But I measured myself, aware that this confrontation required precision, not emotion. I began documenting everything. Photos of the stickers, serial numbers clearly displayed, the official-looking approval stamps, and even the QR code evidence showing my lake on their website. Every detail mattered because this wasn't merely a disagreement over etiquette, It was a test of ownership, a challenge to the rights I had earned through years of planning and investment. Each click of the camera was a reaffirmation of my position, a subtle act of reclaiming control. Tension rippled through our exchange. Malene insisted she was performing legitimate duties, that the lake qualified as a community resource, and that my presence here did not negate her authority. I calmly yet firmly challenged each assertion, citing my deed, the survey, and every document that established my exclusive ownership. She countered with HOA bylaws, her voice steady, rehearsed, confident, but lacking the grounding of reality. Our words collided like two opposing currents, each one testing limits, probing vulnerabilities, gauging reactions. I could feel the stakes mounting, not just in my mind, but in the silent awareness that this was only the beginning. The lake was mine, undeniably, but proving it meant confronting not just one person's arrogance, but the weight of assumed authority, the machinery of bureaucracy, and the subtle intimidation of someone convinced of their own supremacy. I knew then that this encounter, small as it seemed in its initial stage, would set the tone for everything that followed. It was a spark, a first ripple in a conflict that was about to consume every quiet morning I had once taken for granted. And yet, beneath the frustration and disbelief, a determination began to form. A calm certainty that my rights would not be overlooked, that every inch of my lake would remain exactly as it should, mine. The following Saturday morning, the lake greeted me not with its usual serenity, but with the clamor of unexpected activity. From the shoreline, I could see rows of folding chairs aligned with meticulous precision, banners fluttering in the breeze, and solar-powered lights glinting like beacons of intrusion. Someone had transformed my private retreat into a staged event space, all under the guise of Beautification Day. The sound of construction-grade pounding echoed across the water, punctuated by the shuffle of volunteers in neon safety vests. Each step they took, each stake hammered into the earth, felt like a violation, a deliberate reminder that someone else thought they had the right to manipulate my sanctuary. I paused, taking it in, heart pounding, mind racing. How could this be happening? And why had I not seen it coming? The sense of disbelief was rapidly replaced by outrage. The audacity was breathtaking. As I approached, a volunteer explained in clipped, rehearsed tones that Malene Pierce had designated the lake as an HOA amenity to access county mini-grant funding. She mentioned landscaping, solar lighting, and seasonal maintenance, all projects, funded by public money, all planned for my private property. My mind reeled. Was this simply an overreach, or was there something more profound, a calculated move to monetize a lake I had purchased and protected? The thought hit me like a cold wave. These weren't just petty claims. They were financial, schemes hidden behind bureaucratic jargon and community goodwill. I could almost hear the cogs turning behind the carefully worded grant applications and online postings promising seasonal events, $500 participation fees, and exclusive community access. My sanctuary, my hard-earned peace, had been reduced to a ledger line in someone else's budget. I moved along the perimeter, documenting every detail with precision. Each sticker, each note of approval, every banner and sign became evidence. The QR codes on newly posted signs linked to schedules for fishing tournaments, kayak races, and family swim days, all meticulously cataloged and presented as legitimate HOA activities. I photographed them, recorded serial numbers, and cross-referenced dates with county records. Each discovery intensified the tension, each click of the camera a small act of reclaiming order from chaos. The layers of planning were almost theatrical, but beneath the theatrics I sensed a pattern, a hint of something more concerning. Was there an intentional misrepresentation of authority here? Fraud, perhaps, hidden under a facade of community service? The thought alone tightened the knot in my stomach. As the sun rose higher, casting reflective patterns across the lake's surface, the visual contrast between the natural tranquility and the staged intrusion became almost surreal. The chairs gleamed white against the deep greens and blues of the water and trees. Banners flapped with a bureaucratic cheerfulness that felt out of place, and the volunteers moved with coordinated efficiency, oblivious to the fact that they were occupying a space that did not belong to them. I felt a mixture of disbelief and a peculiar determination. Every illegal placement, every documented violation, was now a weapon in a larger fight. I realized that this wasn't just about ownership. It was about standing up to the assumption that someone else could rewrite the boundaries of my life without consequence. By the time I stepped back onto the dock, having stored photographs, compiled notes, and recorded videos of the organized chaos, I knew that the situation had escalated far beyond minor irritation. It had become a full-scale confrontation between entitlement and rightful ownership. My emotions had shifted subtly from anger to clarity. I understood that this battle required strategy as much as outrage. Each sticker, each chair, each posted notice was more than evidence. It was a narrative, a story waiting to be told, and I intended to say to it with precision. The lake was mine, legally and morally, and I was determined that the world would see that fact before any misrepresentation could take root. After documenting every sticker, banner, and ill-placed chair, I knew the next step demanded more than photographs and personal notes. This was no longer a simple dispute. The stakes had risen to a level where authority and accountability needed to intervene. I reached out to the sheriff's office, explained the situation, and requested guidance. The deputy arrived promptly, a professional presence that immediately shifted the tension. For the first time, someone representing formal power was assessing the situation on my terms. The lake, the dock, and every inch of my property were about to be evaluated not through claims or assumptions, but through legal and factual authority. Standing there, I realized how vital validation from credible institutions could be, not only to protect my rights, but to assert them with unassailable clarity. Shortly thereafter, I sought the counsel of the county clerk, Tom, whose meticulous knowledge of property records would become an invaluable resource. Together, we reviewed deeds, survey maps, and past ownership transfers. The evidence left no room for ambiguity. The lake was mine, unequivocally, every square foot recorded in official documents and historical property registries. Tom's calm affirmation was more than comforting. It was a tangible reinforcement that the facts supported my position. Yet the question lingered. How could Malene Pierce have continued her claim with such certainty, presenting herself as an authority despite the glaring legal truth? It was a question that hovered uneasily, but one that would soon be answered through confrontation. The involvement of environmental officials added an unexpected dimension. When they arrived to examine unpermitted alterations along the shoreline, I could sense the gravity of the situation growing. Their presence signaled that this conflict had extended beyond personal property rights. It now touched public responsibility, regulatory compliance, and community safety. Observing the inspector's note discrepancies, asking pointed questions, and recording violations with methodical precision, I felt an unusual mix of relief and empowerment. The evidence I had gathered was no longer merely my own. It was corroborated by impartial experts capable of enforcing consequences. The balance of authority was shifting, and for the first time, Malene's confident assertions were being weighed against formal, verifiable records. When I confronted her directly with these officials present, the contrast was stark. Malene's usual composure faltered ever so slightly as she attempted to assert control, citing bylaws and procedural claims. Yet each point she raised was systematically countered by the deputies and inspectors, backed by deeds, county maps, and regulations she could not dispute. Her confidence wavered under the weight of authority. The room was no longer hers to command, no matter how polished her delivery. I watched, quietly but resolutely, as the narrative shifted. What had begun as a battle for recognition was transforming into a public affirmation of my rights. Each challenge she presented only reinforced the clarity of ownership and the necessity of accountability. By the time the day concluded, my legal position was not just reinforced, it was irrefutable. Every interaction with the sheriff, county clerk, and environmental officials had built a framework in which facts, authority, and accountability converged. The lake, my dock, and the surrounding property were validated in the eyes of both the law and the community. And while the confrontation had been tense, even unsettling at moments, there was an undeniable shift within me, a deeper understanding of empowerment. The realization that rightful authority could be mobilized, that documentation and persistence mattered, transformed anxiety into strategic confidence. For any homeowner facing audacious claims or overreach, the lesson was clear. Preparation, evidence, and the intervention of credible authority could turn vulnerability into decisive strength. The morning I returned to the lake, the water had changed. Its usual deep blue-green shimmer now glowed an unnatural neon hue, spreading like liquid fire across the surface. Panic surged through me as I spotted small bluegill and bass floating belly up, drifting in clusters near the shoreline. My sanctuary, the place I had painstakingly nurtured, was under attack, not by bureaucracy alone, but by something far more tangible, far more destructive. How could this be happening? Who could justify poisoning a private water body, not just for aesthetics, but for what appeared to be an unpermitted experiment? The thought tightened a fist around my chest. This wasn't just overreach. It was outright environmental harm. Immediately, I began collecting evidence, moving with deliberate precision despite the shock. Photographs captured the unnatural glow, documenting the scale of the contamination. At the same time, notes cataloged the affected wildlife and areas of concern. As I investigated further, text messages between HOA contractors and Moline Pierce surfaced, revealing instructions to use an industrial-grade dye rather than the approved tracer materials, all to save on costs and avoid bureaucratic delays. Each word in those messages felt like a confirmation that the lake had been knowingly compromised. I could almost feel the indignation building not just in myself, but in anyone who would hear this story. How could someone risk an entire ecosystem for the sake of convenience, appearances, or grants without accountability? The implications were immediate and frightening. My lake served as a secondary drinking water source for nearby homes, drawing from the same aquifer that supplied the community. What began as a violation of property and authority had escalated to a matter of public health and federal jurisdiction. I contacted environmental authorities without delay, their arrival signaling that the stakes were no longer personal, they were national. The presence of inspectors, clipboard in hand, created an undercurrent of suspense. Every chemical test, every observation, brought the potential for criminal accountability closer to reality. Each official step reassured me that justice could be pursued. Still, it also made the enormity of Moline's recklessness impossible to ignore. The investigation revealed more than I expected. Contractors admitted that Moline had explicitly instructed them to cut corners, bypassing required permits and using cheaper industrial dye for the experiments. Their confessions, corroborated by environmental reports, painted a picture of deliberate negligence. The neon green waters, the floating fish, the disrupted aquatic ecosystem, all were tangible evidence of a scheme that had begun as unauthorized HOA activity and had now escalated into potential federal violations. I realized that my role had shifted. I was no longer just a homeowner defending property, but a guardian of public safety, a witness to negligence with real-world consequences. As I documented each revelation, the tension built not from uncertainty about my rights, but from the unpredictability of the subsequent discovery. Would authorities intervene swiftly? Would Moline face consequences before further damage occurred? Each answer lay just beyond reach, sustaining suspense while fueling a resolve I hadn't felt before. The outrage I felt was now focused, sharpened into purpose. The lake would be protected, its integrity restored, and every responsible party held accountable. The conflict had grown, but so had my clarity and determination. I knew this battle was no longer just about ownership. It was about justice, environmental responsibility, and ensuring that no one else could manipulate authority to endanger what belonged to the community and to me. The day of the final confrontation arrived, and I found myself standing in the county administration building, the weight of anticipation pressing against my chest. Multiple officials had gathered, representatives from property, environmental services, the sheriff's office, and an insurance fraud investigator. The room hummed with quiet authority, a palpable tension that seemed to magnify every slight movement. Across from me, Malene Pierce arrived with her attorney, her usual confidence slightly diminished. However, she still attempted a composed front. I could feel the anticipation building, not just in myself, but in every person present. This was the culmination of weeks of documentation, confrontation, and unwavering persistence. The question lingered in the air. Would justice prevail, or would audacity win once again? The presentation began with deeds and survey maps, the evidence of my ownership laid bare for all to see. Tom, the county clerk, walked through every historical transfer and official record, meticulously confirming that the lake, the dock, and the surrounding property belonged solely to me. Each declaration felt like a subtle victory, a quiet reinforcement that my preparation and diligence were now being validated publicly. Next came the environmental fines, highlighted by Sarah from County Environmental, detailing the illegal dye discharge and the resulting damage to the lake's ecosystem. The visuals of neon green water and dead fish elicited murmurs of disbelief, turning the room's focus squarely onto the consequences of Malene's reckless decisions. As the evidence mounted, the fraud elements became undeniable. The insurance investigator presented documents showing attempts to secure property coverage the HOA did not own, pointing to forged signatures and misrepresented authority. Text messages, contractor admissions, and county rejection letters were displayed, leaving no room for denial. Malene's posture shifted as the weight of these revelations pressed down. The confident, commanding figure who had once claimed control over my property now seemed small, flustered, and exposed. Every authority in the room now held irrefutable proof of her overreach and misconduct. I watched, a mix of satisfaction and resolve coursing through me, as the culmination of weeks of preparation transformed into tangible accountability. The legal surrender was both swift and decisive. Malene, with the encouragement of her attorney, signed the statement acknowledging that she and the HOA held no ownership, management rights, or authority over the lake. The fines were assigned, and directives to remove every unauthorized installation, including the chairs, banners, and solar lights, were issued. The officials ensured the compliance measures were enforceable and immediate, leaving no ambiguity. For the first time, the lake felt truly mine again, legally, morally, and symbolically. Standing there, watching the room's energy shift from tension to resolution, I felt an overwhelming sense of empowerment. Months of confrontation, documentation, and perseverance had led to this moment. The audience of officials and witnesses shared in the satisfaction, observing the collapse of Malene's false authority and the restoration of rightful ownership. It was not just a victory for me. It was a demonstration of how preparation, persistence, and the courage to challenge wrongdoing can turn vulnerability into triumph. The lake, my sanctuary, was confirmed, protected, and respected. The lessons of accountability and justice would resonate far beyond that room. The morning after the legal surrender, the lake felt like it had finally exhaled. Professional contractors moved methodically along the shoreline, removing the solar lights, chairs, banners, and every installation Malene had authorized without consent. Each piece dismantled, each stake pulled from the ground, seemed to restore not just the physical landscape, but the balance that had been disrupted for weeks. Watching the cleanup unfold, I felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense that order was being returned to a space that had always belonged to me. It was more than just property, it was a sanctuary, a reflection of the care and attention I had invested, now visible again in every calm ripple of water. The community, too, experienced restoration in its own way. Letters were sent correcting misinformation about fees and access. Neighbors informed that the lake had always been private property and a fair, transparent system was introduced for those wishing to enjoy specific amenities. A modest $25 conservation fee contributing to county preservation efforts. This wasn't about exclusion, but about respect and responsibility, ensuring that access honored both legal ownership and communal interest. The process reminded me that proper authority is grounded in fairness, clarity, and accountability, not in assumptions or unchecked claims. I realized that vigilance and preparation were essential not just for myself, but for the well-being of the community and the integrity of shared spaces. As I stood on the dock, observing the water returning to its natural rhythm, I reflected on the emotional journey. The outrage, frustration, and tension that had defined the past weeks had transformed into a profound sense of justice and empowerment. I understood that the battle had never been about confrontation alone. It was about asserting boundaries, protecting what is rightfully yours, and demonstrating that intentional overreach cannot prevail when met with persistence and evidence. There was pride in knowing that the truth had prevailed, that due process had been followed, and that the lake, my lake, was once again safe, respected, and intact. And yet, even in this closure, a quiet lesson lingered. I knew that challenges would arise again, that entitlement and bureaucratic overreach could surface in unexpected ways. But the experience had instilled a vigilance and confidence I would carry forward. Standing there, the sun casting golden light across the water, I felt a deep, reflective calm. The lake mirrored not just the sky, but the culmination of effort, patience, and resolve. It was a reminder that defending what is yours requires courage and clarity, but that victory, when achieved thoughtfully, brings an enduring sense of peace and satisfaction. In that stillness I smiled, knowing the sanctuary had been restored, and that I was ready to protect it again, should anyone ever challenge its rightful ownership.